So just before we move on from the myth of Ur, I'll mention a couple of examples given by David Hillman in his book The Soul's Code about demonic influence on human beings. You can see it everywhere. You can see it everywhere. You go into a shop where the people are, or a restaurant where they're cooking fantastic food. I'm thinking of one shop in Paddington, Sydney at the moment. It was called Hot Gossip. And I was attracted to the shop, to going in, by the display in the window. It was just amazing. They had chocolate cakes with all these special trimmings on the top. They had trifles, they had jellies, they had health food, they had salads, they had everything spread out. It was a real smorgasbord in the front window. Everything fresh. Going past, you'd think, what is that? And you'd have a look. You knew there was something different. And you went in, and there was a little woman there, she was a Jewish woman. Her parents had been held in the concentration camps, Hitler's concentration camps, for quite a number of years. And she was in there as a child. And they survived on potato peelings and all this just rubbish from the garbage dump, a lot of it. They managed to stay alive by scraping together any bits and pieces of food. I interviewed her. I actually wrote a story, an article on her. And what she told me was that when she was a girl in the concentration camp, she used to get these little scraps of food that was her portion for the day. Potato peelings with the dirt still on them, bits of carrots, bits of lettuce that weren't very fresh, half rotten, from the Germans' quarters, and that had been thrown into the rubbish bin. They'd acquire this food and eat it, and there was nearly make you sick eating the food, apparently. What she did, she imagined and she dreamt every day she'd have potato peelings. She'd pretend it was the most finest food. There was absolutely wonderful stuff, and only she had it. Very special food. This is what she'd talk herself into believing every day. And she'd imagine it was covered in chocolate, and some of the white parts were cream. And she'd sit there eating this terrible food, but dreaming that it was wonderful stuff. So she spent years of her early childhood. And later on, a great part of her calling was food. She was, you could almost say, fanatical about food. She loved cooking good food. You'd never get a complaint in that restaurant. It's a little cafe, actually. You'd never get a complaint. She cooked up the most beautiful food. It was just amazing stuff. She served it well on the plate. The waitresses were dressed well. The whole thing was like a prayer. It was amazing. That was a calling. The foundation of her calling was in her childhood. We're molded and shaped for the function of our lives in our childhood, no matter how abusive the childhood is. Important point to remember. Other stories, you have people like Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill has gone down in history as not only being a great statesman. I mean, I'm Irish, so a lot of the Irish aren't particularly in love with the history of Winston Churchill, but I won't go into that. But for the English, he was a great hero. And Winston Churchill will go down in history as being the man who turned the course of the Second World War. That is what the English believe. And there is quite some evidence to support that concept, that theory. In the darkest days, Winston Churchill had a great gift of oratory. If you listen to his speeches, the original ones which I recorded, others that were done by Richard Burton in a very similar voice, he imitated Churchill's voice very, very well. You listen to those speeches, and they are absolutely amazing. Churchill, when they thought England was on the brink of being invaded from front by the German armies, which they were poised to invade, people in England were terrified. They knew that once the Germans got into England, the whole thing was over. They had a massive army that had nothing but success all across Europe. They destroyed everything in their path, and next port of call was England. He made a speech, we shall fight them in the ditches, we shall fight them on the beaches, we will fight them here, there and everywhere, we will never surrender. And listening to his voice, I've heard it on tape, you believe the man. He had a great gift of oratory. He inspired the English people. He inspired people around the world. He inspired American people. Churchill was half American, of course. I think it was his mother that was American. He was half American, and the Americans loved him. His speeches were incredible. That was his gift, that was his passion, and that was his calling. The interesting thing about Churchill was that when he was at school, he was put into what we would now call the remedial class. His English function was terrible. He apparently didn't really understand the English language, how it's formed. He could not make speeches at school. He could not stand up in front of the class. He was terrified. He used to stutter. And he was put into the lowest possible class and regarded as something of a half-wit, certainly in his English function. Now, Hillman in his book goes on to suggest that when our daemon is so powerful that it has something really, really important to do, it is so urging to come out that it frightens the host, the human being. It frightens you, and you sort of pull back from it. So Churchill, in a sense, was too frightened of learning how to speak English because it knew subconsciously or somehow in the soul that there were going to be great demands put on him. That he was going to have to represent the English race in the Second World War. And apparently he shrunk back from that. But the daemonic influence was pushing him forward.